This is Dateline News and Conversation. The show today, we're continuing to focus on Donald Trump's 28, or is it 19-point peace plan? Seems to change pretty rapidly. And we're also going to focus on the newly released National Security Strategy, the NSS. My guest, the good friend, he's returning, Eric Arnow from Chiang Mai in Thailand. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Regis. Great to see you again.
So, Eric, you and I and many others have been talking about the 28-point peace plan submitted by Donald Trump, supposedly. Some are claiming that Russia wrote it or rewrote it, and which I have a really hard time to believe. But there are so many pitfalls in this. And the one thing about it that Putin and Lavrov have continued to say is they are not going to get involved in quote unquote bullhorn diplomacy. Eric, just as an overview, and then we'll dig into it a little deeper. What are your thoughts about this 28-point peace plan or 19-point peace plan, whatever it is now, and does it have a chance of succeeding? And then we'll dig into it.
Okay. The complicated answer to that is no. It has no chance of succeeding. It is based on completely false assumptions. Here's the reality. The reality is that the United States has an obsession with controlling the world, and Russia is standing in the way, and it has a lot of resources, so it has to be done in. And so they tried by cultivating Ukraine over the course of 8 decades, ever since the end of World War II, when they were supporting the Nazi collaborators with Hitler, and eventually they got control of the country, and the U.S. armed them, trained them, financed them, and they thought they had a winning hand here. They thought they were going to be able to take Russia down between sanctions and this a very strong quasi-NATO military, and Russia fooled them all, because Russia apparently understood, at some point, that they were going to have to rebuild their whole military-industrial complex and rebuild their society so that it had a degree of autarky, that is, the ability to survive, without the West's support, and in fact, in the face of Western hostility and sanctions. So the whole plan has gone completely awry. They're in a state of disarray as to what to do. Europe has obviously been caught flat-footed. The whole idea of the Nord Stream pipeline and getting Europe, attached to the U.S., that isn't working. None of it is working, and so they're desperate. And so they've come up with this 28-point peace plan, which, on the face of it, I actually did an analysis of it, going through. I wrote an article called the excellent peace plan. It just needs a few tweaks, which I'm being ironic about, because the whole thing is just I would say maybe 75% at least unacceptable. So when Russia says, "Oh, this peace plan, it has some merit, we could work with this thing," they're basically being extremely charitable by saying that. It's like it's like somebody who's a drug addict, and they've stopped taking drugs for 12 hours, and the therapist is saying, "Good job, you're off to a great start." Well, they've got a long way to go on that peace plan. It's really not going to work.
Well, Eric, want to comment on a couple of things. Right off the bat, you said it's based on a number of false assumptions. And the other thing that I think we need to address, if only briefly, is the UK is doing everything it can to undermine any type of peace deal in Ukraine. And they have got France, Germany to join with them in doing everything they can to undermine any peace process. What are your thoughts on that? And especially in regards to this, Eric, the one thing that to me has been glaring throughout all of this peace talk is Donald Trump has tried to make this something that he's brokering between Ukraine and Russia, when he himself and all of the EU are direct participants. So wouldn't you think if there's going to be some kind of peace making that the Europeans have got to be involved in this? Because what we're really talking about, what Russia is always talking about, is a pan-Eurasian security agreement for everybody. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, there are news reports that point out that not only U.S. but British mercenaries have been caught. And I just saw a report today where an actual active duty British mercenary, he's not even a mercenary, he's part of the British Army, was killed recently. And the British press was reported, well, it was some kind of accident that occurred. No, you are there fighting Russia as a member of the British military. You have no business there. And so for them to say that, it was just an accident, it's completely disingenuous. So, of course, the British, the French are clearly engaged in it. The United States is clearly engaged in it. The Germans were gloating over Kursk. They thought they were going to finally defeat Russia in the Kursk as a replay of the disastrous defeat that they experienced in World War II. So, as General Zhukov, the German general, said, we drove he said, we liberated Europe from the fascists and they will never forgive us. So there you are, And I was just talking with this young Russian guy I saw here in Chiang Mai. There's a lot of people like that. I said, you really need to understand the history. This is not something that happened in 2022. We're talking about, nuclear war plans against the Soviet Union going back to 1945. So, and it's been going forward like this decade after decade. So this is just the latest iteration of it. And people think that it comes out of nowhere. It hasn't. It's got a huge historical context. And that's the reason why it's so difficult to disentangle, because there's tremendous historical momentum to take down Russia. And the fact that it's not working is what is causing so much turmoil in the Western capitals.
What bothers me? A lot of this bothers me, but here you have Trump, who supposedly created a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Palestine, and he's appointed himself as the head of the Peace Council. He's going to be the arbitrator, and that obviously has fallen apart completely. Now, here he is, a warmonger, threatening to attack Venezuela, levying more sanctions on that country, committing murder by blasting these fishing boats. They're not drug runners, out of the water. And now hijacking a supposedly Venezuelan oil ship going to Cuba. Now, if that's not enough, we have to remember that he bombed Yemen and bragged about it. He bombed Iran and bragged about it. Also bombed Yemen and bragged about it. And here we have him talking about being a peacemaker here in Ukraine, when all of his actions dictate and prove otherwise. He's not a peacemaker. And the thing that bothers me is that you and I both know Obama refused to send lethal weapons to Ukraine during 2014 in the coup. it was Donald Trump who was the first one in his first administration, Trump 1.0, who sent javelins and who sent other HIMARS and howitzers and weapons to Ukraine. And he blames this on Biden, Sleepy Joe. Now, can people, Eric, not see the duplicity in all of this? This is what baffles me. It's like, it's right out there in people's faces, but even in the blogosphere, the alt media, they don't seem to be pointing this out. What are your thoughts on Trump and the positioning that he's taken, and how, well, in my opinion, and I don't know what you think, the duplicity?
Have you ever seen the play Glengarry Glen Ross? It's about two unscrupulous real estate agents that are in competition with each other. And I emphasize the word unscrupulous. He is not sending professional diplomats to negotiate his deals. He's sending himself, who is a lifelong real estate, professional, so to speak, and his two sidekicks, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. So he's not sending professional diplomats. He's sending real estate agents to do his negotiating for him. So right off the bat, how can there possibly be any success when you have people who don't even have a grounding in diplomatic skills or the history of the conflict?
Eric, you're making an incredibly important point. And what's been reported is that Lavrov has come out and said, we're not going to get involved in bullhorn diplomacy out here in the public. But Eric, what was obviously lacking from the meeting last week between Witkoff, Kushner, and Putin was Lavrov, noticeably absent. And so your point of these two guys are real estate goons. They were there thinking that, we've got to work with Russia. And it's even been reported in some places that they are already trying to make deals on various Russian resources, including oil. Mm-hmm. Now, you made this abundantly clear. If there is any diplomacy that's going on, it's not being done in public. Russia would never fall for that. And so what you have is Vladimir Putin shaking hands and smiling and saying, we've made progress, but progress in terms of what? And what I think that means diplomatically, Eric, is, in terms of this peace plan, it's a starting point. All they're doing is saying, we don't want to cut off all contact, all communication. So it's a starting point. We can continue to talk about it. Meanwhile, Russia continues to advance in Ukraine to completing all of its special goals for the special military operation. Your thoughts?
I was just thinking that if Vladimir Putin had ever come to the United States and joined the Rotary Club, he'd probably become the president of it. For your guests who don't know, the Rotary Club is a business organization where people go to network and further their careers under the ostensible rubric of being a charitable organization, when in fact it's just a bunch of businessmen rubbing elbows with each other and doing deals. And so Putin, being the extraordinary diplomat that he is able to basically glad hand with the best of them. Now, my Russian friends have more, what can I say, more, they have reservations about his motives, but my feeling is that I hope that Russia has really learned its lesson from the 1990s, and that the people at the highest up levels understand what they're dealing with. As I've said, we've discussed this many times, you have to look at the United States not as a strategic issue, but as a geographical issue. We're talking about a psychological mindset that the West has to dominate and manipulate, and that is the way they are wired. And if people don't see it in that context, they'll miss the forest for the trees. That is the source of the problem. Until people come to that, they're not going to be able to negotiate properly.
Yeah, and you made a point at the very beginning. The focus of the United States and the West for hundreds of years has been to crush Russia, to rape and pillage its resources, and to take back Crimea. And so I think that's an extremely important point to remember. The leopard is not going to change its spots. It can't. And the other thing is, Eric, Trump wants to be the peacemaker. He said he was going to make peace on day one. And you know what, Eric? He had the power to do it, but he didn't, because he played this little game, still trying to take down Russia, to prolong this war, he is sending and still sending billions of dollars of weapons through NATO to Ukraine. I mean, it is so, oh my God, I have a hard time even not getting really angry about this, but it is so duplicitous. It's egregious. Anyway, let's look at a couple of things before we move on. I think there are maybe 4 or 5 points in the peace plan that Russia could just never accept. And I'll list them, and then you comment. Point number 21, it has to do with the territories that Ukraine is never going to agree to, and Zelensky has said it as much recently. He will not agree to the plan. Ukraine is never going to give back the territories. Well, it's already written in the Russian constitution that the Donbass, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea are formally, legally parts of Russia, as they have been since Catherine the Great. Point number 5, Eric, security guarantees for Ukraine. You know, what they're really talking about is Article 5 of the NATO doctrine, that the West, the EU, will protect Ukraine to the same degree they'll protect anybody else if they're attacked. And then, point number 6, it's suggested that Ukraine's army will be limited to 600,000. Now, I don't think they have that much left, really, but the first goal of Russia's special military operation is the demilitarization of Ukraine. 600,000 not going to be accepted by Russia. Point number 14, $300 billion of Russia's assets are going to be given to rebuild Ukraine. Russia is already taking to court the International Association in Belgium that is holding these resources. And then point number 27, Trump is appointing himself the head of the governing peace council in Ukraine. Eric, please, I know you can't help but laughing, but just on those 5 points, Eric, this peace plan is dead in the water. What's there to talk about, Eric? I mean, why would Russia waste its time in talking about any of this stuff when those 5 points are just not acceptable?
You know, you left out one other minor point. It's just a minor point of amnesty. So, you know, Russia's initial reason to go into Ukraine in the first place was demilitarization and denazification, because the U.S., you know, empowered Nazis to take over the government, and this peace plan wants Russia to let these people off the hook who've been responsible for numerous atrocities. So that in itself is absolutely, it goes against the entire point of the whole military operation. Now, as far as all the points that you raised, I can't remember there's 6 of them. I can't remember all of them, but like, as far as the territories are concerned, as you say, one issue there is that Ukraine says they're part of Ukraine's constitution. Russia says they're part of our constitution. They're not agreeing on that. So what are you going to do? They're going to have to fight it out because Ukraine is not going to negotiate that and Russia is not going to negotiate it. So that's another example of it. What are some of the others? Which one do you think is of the 6, which do you think is the most important? I mean, I thought amnesty was the one that's absolutely unacceptable. It goes to the heart of the whole problem.
Yeah, you make a really good point of mentioning the amnesty. Absolutely. I think when you put these together, the 5 points that I mentioned, you adding the amnesty, and we could even add some others. Basically, this is a non-starter. It's not going anywhere. Absolutely. And in my opinion, Russia is just continuing to move forward all across Ukraine. And meanwhile, Trump and others and the Europeans are busying themselves arguing over a peace plan. Russia's more than happy, I think, to have them arguing over a peace plan. And Russia continues to do everything that it is set out to do in Ukraine, nonstop, with not very much resistance. Almost every commentator from the West, and probably the 2 of the best, the most popular, would be Scott Ritter and Douglas McGregor. They've been saying for weeks it's all over. And now they're beginning to say Russia is going to have to go all the way to Odessa. And they're even beginning to say that Russia is going to have to take over at least temporary governance of Ukraine going forward. There's no other alternative. Eric, let's leave it at that. I think this is what's happening. Russia is just being the consummate diplomat. Yes, we want to talk. We want to continue talking, resolve these issues, and yet moving ahead with the special military operation. I mean, to some of us, that's as clear as day. Let's move on now to this national security.
I want to say just one thing about this. The core issue is that the United States over the last 30 years has completely de-diplomaticized itself. It has no real diplomatic skills. The fact that they're sending real estate agents to do negotiations for them, when I think it was Trump, his first term, he cleaned out a lot of the State Department. Now, the State Department itself had lots of problems because it's loaded with Zionists and Russophobes, but you don't have any, you have, and the whole educational system of Georgetown University and that whole diplomatic training complex has been emasculated. Nothing there. So there's nobody who even knows how to negotiate. So
yeah, you make a good point, and contrast that with Russia and their foreign ministry development.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, they've been training diplomats properly, well, forever, really. And anyway, so you make a really good point.
Yesterday, I was at this. It was a Russia-Thai business council exhibit in the center of the town, like right in the center of the city where I live. And who's there? This young lady that you had interviewed, and she is training to be a diplomat. She's like 20 years old or something, and she's still wet behind the ears, and they're training her to be a diplomat by starting off an exhibition like this, and she says she's hoping to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's the next Maria Zakharova, at 20 years old. So,
actually, what she told me is that she probably would like to be Maria Zakharova, but certainly a deputy of Sergei Lavrov. And there are thousands of these young people. It's very difficult to get into MGIMO, they call it. But the Russian Ministry of Defense is a training program. They go through 4 or 5 years, 6 years of training. It's like university. And when they finish with that, then they're probably sent to one of the foreign ministries to work abroad for a while and to learn how it is working online with different countries. But it's an incredible program. And as you point out, so glaring that the United States does not have one singular program. It's a number of universities that offer courses in foreign ministry or diplomacy or geopolitics, but it's a totally fractured, really useless system, as you pointed out.
And driven ideologically. Driven ideologically.
Exactly.
There's no one like a Stephen Cohen or a Ray McGovern who have had decades of study of Russia or the Soviet Union, what these countries are about, how they're motivated. If you can't understand your enemy from their point of view, you have no basis to negotiate. And that's where it's at this point.
Before we move on, it'd be terrible to fail to mention this. When we're talking about a peace plan, Russia has always said that, the core issues that we're concerned about, our security, have to be addressed. And the core issues, Eric, the 1991 promise to Gorbachev by Secretary James Baker under Ronald Reagan, that NATO would not expand 1 inch towards Russia. And Gorbachev agreed to reunify Germany. And beginning with Clinton on to the present, the United States has violated that. They've soaked up, I think it's 9 former Soviet republics, and they're continuing to try to expand. They have expanded in Sweden and Finland, for God's sake. It's unbelievable. And so the United States and Trump is not even talking about this. Witkoff says, Trump is really beginning to understand Russia's concerns. Really? Why don't we articulate what those concerns are? What the United States has done since 1991. And this is another reason why this is never going to get solved, because Russia's basic security needs is a pan-European, Eurasian security architecture that guarantees the peace, security, and safety of every one of those countries that are involved in this. All right, Eric, let's move on, because I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about the national security strategy. Everybody in the blogosphere and alt media have been all over this. Some of them are being optimistic. And I think what they're doing is they're cherry picking things that sound good. But Eric, they failed to consider what you started talking about earlier in this conversation, the historical context, that what the United States is and has been since its inception. And until people begin to realize that, they have a misconception of what this document really is all about. I'm just going to ask you the question again. What's your initial reaction and assessment to this national security strategy document that was just released?
Well, I call it Détente 2.0 plus Monroe Doctrine 2.0. In other words, this is the U.S. has failed dismally in its attempt to take over Russia and using Ukraine. And as a result, they've created this document, which is ostensibly to give Russia the feeling that the United States wants to be their friend and wants to, patch things up, so to speak. This is what happened in the Nixon approach to Russia and the negotiation of that. I think it was the ABM treaty in early 1970, I think 1972. So there was a period of time during the 1970s when relations between the United States and Russia were actually fairly good. There was actually a multi-segment documentary called The Unknown War, where Burt Lancaster was participating in a joint Soviet-US series talking about what hell Russia went through during World War II, so the American people could get some sense of empathy for what they had to go through. But my feeling is that it was all a ploy to basically psychologically disarm Russia so that it would come back later on and start the whole thing all over again. And as far as Monroe Doctrine 2.0, it's the same situation. The United States the document talks about sovereignty of countries, and they say, oh, we want the people in South America to be sovereign, but if they don't do what we want them to do, we're going to do what we have to do to make sure that they do comply with what we want. So where's the sovereignty? See, that this is the example of the duplicity. I call it the white man speaks with forked tongue. People have to read this document clearly or carefully to see the contradictions in it, the self-contradictions.
So, Eric, let's look at some of the points and see if we can't debunk this. The claim that the United States no longer seeks global domination. Yeah, you're laughing and chuckling already. So am I. What do you think is really behind this, and why is it such a scam? I have my opinion, but I want to know what you think.
Well, what they're really saying is we still want to be the dominating factor in the world. We just don't want to pay for it or do any work. So we're going to hire a bunch of proxies to do the work that we're too lazy to do or too cowardly to do. So we'll hire Japan, we'll hire Taiwan, we'll hire the Philippines to encircle China in order to defend. So we're going 6,000 miles away to circle and strangle China's shipping lanes, and we're accusing China of being aggressive here. And who are we using? We're using our quote unquote allies. Japan, who is like a battered spouse that got smashed after World War II, and now will do whatever the United States says. Taiwan, of course, for people who don't know, in the Civil War, it was Chiang Kai-shek who was fighting against Mao Zedong and the communists, and they lost because Mao Zedong built his strength around the population, which was mostly rural, and so they basically built a powerful force that kicked the nationalists out, and the nationalists were backed by the United States because the U.S. they hate communism. They absolutely cannot stand anything where a government has control of its banking system. So now Taiwan has been part of China nominally. The United States had to admit that it was part of China in 1972, and yet in fact, the way it acts is to use Taiwan as a proxy against China. It's been arming China, which is completely outrageous and illegal. And China puts up with it because they don't want a war. But at some point, something's going to have to happen. And the same thing is going on with Europe. the United States says, we want to build European self-respect, and we want to. It's too bad that Europe's suffering from cultural collapse, something like that. Well, maybe if the United States and France and England and Italy had not gotten rid of Gaddafi, who told them that if they got rid of him, the terrorists would take over the country, and they would make a mess and cause mass migration to Europe. So whose fault is it? It's Europe's fault for causing the catastrophe in Libya. And now they're saying, oh, what's the problem here? We got to keep the immigrants out. Well, you caused the immigrant problem, just like you caused the immigrant problem in the United States by overthrowing governments and destroying their economies. This is how it works. It's really it's tragic that the U.S. has no ability for introspection to realize that the problems that they see in the world are the problems of their own creation.
You made a couple of really good points. The first one is, the United States is claiming that we don't seek global dominance. Yet, simultaneously in this document, the United States says we will prevent other powers from achieving dominance in key domains: technology, finance, energy. What else is there? And pushes policies to retain unrivaled military and economic position. And as you said, using other countries, you said hiring other countries. And Peter Kuznick the other night made the same point. He called it empire on the cheap. That
Right.
United States still is committed to being the dominant force in the universe, but now making others pay for it. I mean,
it's brilliant strategy.
Yeah. It's
see, you got to understand something, Regis. The whole point of the real estate business is getting rich using other people's money. You know about that? You borrow money from the bank at the lowest rates possible. You buy a property, you flip the property, and you make a ton of money. And it wasn't even your money to begin with. And they're doing it on an empire level. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's the
lessons from the United States,
and that's the entire economic banking system of the United States. It's usury. It's creating a debt-ridden, debt-burdened populace. I mean, it's unreal that people can see this and think, oh, wow, the United States is changing. The leopard is changing its spots. It's ridiculous. One of the other things is the document is emphasizing sovereignty and non-interference, yet it proposes the same aggressive measures: economic coercion, technology controls, Monroe-style regional posture, and, still using sanctions, still using the CIA and, the overthrow of governments. Nothing is going to change. The extrajudicial killing of leaders of other countries. You mentioned Gaddafi. They just glossed over this. But when you really look at what they're saying and analyzing these self-contradictory statements in this document, I can't understand how some people even are optimistic about anything in here. I don't know. What else do you think?
Well, again, getting back to that issue on intervention, there was one particular passage. Maybe if you can find it, you got to read that that passage. America is not. It states a bunch of complete contradictions. America is not interventionist, but they might be but they will have to be interventionist sometimes. Where was that? There was a particular. There's like a paragraph where they say 5 items without being. They say, "Oh, we're not going to be realism, but we're going to be realistic without being realism," something like that. Do you remember that paragraph?
Yeah.
It's just they say like 5 non sequiturs in a row, and I'm thinking, what are they talking about here? And they expect people to swallow this.
You know, the other interesting thing is the language that's changed towards Russia and China. No longer enemies, but, you know, we're competitors. And, you know, that all sounds really nice. But when you look at what the United States has been doing in the pivot to Asia, in the South China Sea, encircling China with tens of thousands of American troops and weapons in Japan, Okinawa, South Korea, and then with the, I don't know how many fleets they have in the Asia Pacific, in using countries on the island chain, you know, the Philippines, and trying to get other countries in Asia to support them against China. Nothing has changed. This language is well, it's totally deceptive. And then when you think about Russia, when you look at what they're really trying to say is, and you're talking, this is a real estate guy. He's a real estate hacker. And he sends Witkoff and Kushner to try to make deals and arrange for deals with Putin for when this war is over, to try to encourage Putin to end it, okay, to agree. Let's have a ceasefire. Let's pull back. It's never going to happen. And what has the you know, there's an expression. You don't listen to what they say, you watch what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of Russia, in terms of China, you mentioned Taiwan, the United States has not ceased to do anything they've been doing to pressure China and Russia whatsoever. The same, how many sanctions? Over 2,500 sanctions on Russia?
25,
Trump,
20, there's 20 packages of sanctions, and there's a total of like 20,000 specific sanctions that on individuals and companies and so on and so forth. There's thousands and thousands of sanctions.
Has Trump not attempted to wipe out those sanctions? Nothing. Nothing is said about, has Europe attempted or offered to wipe out those sanctions? No, they haven't. Have either side refused to stop sending weapons and money to Ukraine? In fact, the EU is trying to rig an election so that they will be able to avoid a one-state veto on stealing Russia's assets.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Eric, when you look at what the United States is doing, and you look at this language that, oh, we're going to soften up towards China and Russia, we're not enemies anymore, we're just competitors in this new world, Eric, it's really hard that anybody can accept any of this at face value. And you know, the other thing is Trump, same as Trump, setting himself up as the head of the peacemaking council in Israel and in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. He's even, this document is setting him up really as the head of a new G5, that Russia is not just going to be one amongst equals, it's just going to eliminate all the other noise and will dominate through this new economic structure, which, Eric, you've got the BRICS, you've got the SCO, you've got Russia and China not buying any of that BS. Let's talk about that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
It occurred to me that it was kind of like an attempt to start a group therapy group at a mental hospital. You understand what I'm saying? So you got these 5 big countries, and the head of the mental hospital says, "Hey guys, come on into my hospital and let's talk about stuff. Talk about our problems." And in these other countries, most of them are relatively sane, are saying, you know, well, thanks a lot, but probably let's put it off till let's talk about it in a year or two or something.
Yeah,
What they're doing, as I say again and again, this empire, it is like an addict. It's like an alcoholic who says, I promise to stop drinking next week. Or the drug addict, I'm promising I'm not going to do that again. Or somebody is a drowning person who is flailing around for whatever they can find to hold themselves afloat. It's an empire. It's lost. It is, as Oswald Spengler and Pepe Escobar talked about this. Oswald Spengler in 1922 said, this is the decline of the West. It had its day. It got too many wars. It wore itself out, and it is self-destructing because of its own delusions and its own internal hostility. It doesn't know how to get along with the rest of the world or each other.
Yeah, I agree. It's never, for the last 500-600 years of Western Europe colonialism, it's not been getting along. It's been the rape and pillage and domination of half the planet. And so nothing has changed.
There's one other thing that I wanted to bring up. I was thinking about this. In Germany, there's a very famous folk epic poem called the Nibelungenlied. And I don't know if you know this, you're a very well-read person. Okay, so the Nibelungenlied is about this war that goes on between these two family factions. And basically, they all kill each other in a blaze of glory. And this was kind of idolized as this is the glory in death. So what we're talking about is a death wish which the West has had against the rest of the world. They've been proving it with multiple genocides, but because they have been eventually forced back on themselves, they're now fighting with each other and they will self-destruct. That's what makes this so dangerous, because they have, it wasn't just in World War I, they were sending millions of young men off to kill each other for nothing. World War II, another 50 million odd people killed. And now we have nuclear weapons. And these people have the same mentality. They have never reformed their own mentality. That is the situation. And they will do anything to maintain this self-destructive and destructive mindset.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from Dr. Helen Caldicott in my film 30 Seconds to Midnight, The Fear of Nuclear War Between the United States and Russia. She said, are we an evolutionary aberration designed in an evolutionary sense not to survive? When you look at what we're doing to the environment, when you look at what the United States especially is doing in terms of weather modification, trying to cool the earth from the power of the sun, weather warfare, and you look at all of this, at what's happening today, you have to wonder, are we an evolutionary aberration that's suicidal, that's not going to survive? Eric, I want to go back to the G5. There's a lot more to say about that. Trump, earlier in this administration, had threatened to break up BRICS, to levy sanctions of 100% on all of them, because he knew that they were trying to do away with the dollar. And that, in fact, is happening. Mm-hmm. And now this language of the G5 is eliminating other countries, the G7, the D20, whatever it is. But basically, it's Trump trying to create some kind of an alternative to BRICS. And when you look at it from the point of view of the BRICS, Russia, China, India, and they look at this language, they're going, we don't want to join that. We've got something really better in this new emerging, but rapidly emerging multipolar world. Why on earth would BRICS want to take part in this American dominated G5? It's totally ridiculous. I don't know. Let's look at a little more things in this document that that are contradictory. Here's one thing, Eric, that I think Brian Berletic, or I'm not sure how he pronounces his name. I think he was Berletic. I think he was the one that said, this document was not written by those forces or entities that make up United States foreign policy and implement it. And by that, he's talking about, well, the deep state. Who are those forces? You know, they're those people, the neocons, if you want to call them that, embedded in Washington. They are the bankers. They are the military industrial complex. They are ultra rich billionaires who influence American foreign policy, including IPAC. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on that comment, that this is just fluff written by, goodness, who knows, maybe Witkoff and Kushner and somebody else of their ilk, and yet it does not represent the core of who and what forms United States foreign policy.
You know, in preparing for this interview, Regis, and going through the text, I thought, let's look at the Project for the New American Century. What does their document have to say? And I looked it up online. It's formatted very, very similarly to the NSS, and the discussion that they have there is very similar to this latest iteration. So from what I can tell, it looks like the same kind of people, the same cabal, you might say, that wrote the Project for the New American Century realized that that's outdated, it's not working, and so they have to rework it to conform to current conditions.
Boy, that's a really good point. And, you know, those people who wrote that document, the New American Century, was to make America dominant, investing billions and billions in the military, in nuclear weapons, American power, so that it would be the America's century. And Eric, I maintain it's those same people and their proteges who are behind American foreign policy today. Nothing has changed. It will never change. It's been this way forever. And, you know, I go back to what I said before. If you don't look at the structure and you don't understand how this has been going on for really decades, and maybe even longer than that, you have no idea what American foreign policy really is all about. It has always been about American domination, American exceptionalism, blessed by God. And our mission is to spread our values throughout the rest of the world, to make the rest of the world like America. Jesus, Eric, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed since this myth was created. Basically, when the Puritans came to the United States of America and cooked up this doctrine of exceptionalism. And you look at the entire history of the United States, everything the United States has done and represents is they are the exceptional country blessed by God. Mm-hmm. We can eliminate Native American people by the millions. We can have slavery to build our economy. Then we can continue to take and rape and pillage the rest of the land from the Native Americans. The Monroe Doctrine, give me a break. The Monroe Doctrine was not just about this hemisphere. It was expanded to include the entire world. And this has been the quest of the United States of America. And I would say England, Great Britain, it's been their quest forever to control the entire globe in order to rape and pillage the resources of this planet. Nothing has changed. And Eric, if there is any hope, it's not in this document. In my
That's right.
opinion, and I think you agree, the only hope is that the BRICS continue to move quickly to change the order of the world and to change the monetary system to get away from the weaponized dollar and the control of the United States. Your last thoughts on that?
The question that I have is, I've maintained for quite a while that in order for things to change, there's going to have to be what I call a dynastic change. That means a complete revamping of the consciousness of the American people as a whole. The American people had a revolution. They thought they were going to establish democracy. It was co-opted by slave traders and mercantilists and bankers, and we've been in a civil war ever since the revolution was co-opted by those people. And the question is it going to take an internal revolution of consciousness where people can see this and recreate a country that is sane, or is it going to come from the outside where the United States leadership structure will be so isolated that it will implode? Or it may end up in a shooting war, which will be a complete catastrophe. So it's very uncertain how things are going, but it can't continue. It's obviously it's going to change. We just don't know how.
Well, there are hopeful signs, Eric, that we've talked about. The youth of this planet and the youth, especially of the United States and Europe, they're recognizing they have no future. They're beginning to protest. As their numbers increase, there's hope in that.
Mm-hmm.
But because Europe and the United States have really become totalitarian fascist dictatorships, if you protest in Europe, if you protest in England, you go to jail. If you protest in America, you're looking at going to jail, or you're looking at being totally brutalized by this police force, whether it be police or ICE or the United States military.
Or being thrown out of the university. People are thrown out of the university for exercising First Amendment rights.
So, there's hope, but then there's little hope to overcome this fascist police state that really exists now in the United States and across Europe. And there's more hope because it's not just, the West, but, young people across the world have been rising up against not being respected and represented by their governments. I think there's hope in that, but there's also the very extreme danger that, and I'll end with this quote, and then you can have your final say. At the end of my film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, I pose this question: will those neocons, whoever you want to call them in Washington, recognizing they have lost this epic battle for the future order of the world, take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? And that's the danger that we face today. Your thoughts, and we'll conclude with that.
Well, again, as I say, I consider it to be the whole situation to be based on a psychological and spiritual problem that the West has not been able to deal with on a psychological or a spiritual level for the last 500 years. And until there's some change in that, who can say where it's all going? As you say, there is an awakening among some youth. And so, yesterday there was a young German guy who was like 18 years old there. And he looked like a classic blonde, blue-eyed. He was as blonde and blue-eyed as the Russian lady. You can't tell the difference between them in terms of their genetic, their appearance. But he was saying Yeah, he doesn't support any of what's going on in Europe. So you have a fair number of people like that, and so that's the hope that eventually. And somebody asked me in response to a recent post that I did. He asked, "What is to be done?" And I answered, "What is to be done is that we have to spread the word. We have to spread consciousness of what is the actual situation. You cannot solve anything until you understand the actual reality. Once you know that, then the thing can change. That is our task, people like you and I."
Yeah, very well stated. It's a matter of reclaiming our humanity. It is a spiritual conversion. It's an awareness of who we are, connected to each other, to everything and everything that's alive and not alive on this planet, and our connection with the universe. And that's the only hope in recovering, is this spiritual conversion. Eric, thanks again so much.
I'll just say one thing in passing. We have to overcome the delusion of individualism and realize that we are all in this together. That's what we have to do.